So let's talk about project teams. These are high-level criteria or characteristics, if you will, of effective project teams. Effective project teams have clear goals and objectives for their projects. They clearly understand what the project is trying to accomplish. Second, team members understand the interdependence among themselves of their work. In other words, you do not have each one doing their own thing in isolation. They understand how their work and their effectiveness individually depends on what everybody else on the team is doing. Number three, there is cohesiveness, meaning that the team members work for a common purpose. They are together. They think of the project as their collective project, as opposed to, for example, it being just the project manager's project. They trust each other, so they don't, once somebody is given a task, the rest of the team trust that that task will be, in fact, performed well. And meanwhile, since everybody, is expected to trust each other, then you, as an individual member, are expected to deliver on the tasks that are delegated to you. And then energy. Effective teams show energy. People, are excited about the work, work hard, and that, especially for longer project, is often the one area where the team leader has to really watch, because very often, especially on longer term projects or projects that are hard, the energy level might go down, and that would affect the performance of the team. So these are high level characteristics of effective teams. And as a project leader, you want to sort of keep tab on all five, and understanding that some of these sometimes will be at a high level and sometimes at a lower level. But this gives you a sort of a little bit of a dashboard, if you will, or checklist to kind of assess how well your team is doing at any point in time. So talking about objectives, goals and objectives, I'm sure some of you have seen this acronym, the notion of SMART objectives for a team. It is important to, when we say clear goals and objectives, what does that mean? Well, it means SMART objectives that are specific, that are measurable, that are actionable, that are relevant to the project at hand, that are timely, and to some extent that are stretched, meaning that they represent, a certain level of effort beyond maybe the routine aspect. So here's an example of what a SMART objective is. We will reduce the number of equipment breakdowns in the plant by 90% within 3 months, from now, at a cost that will not exceed 100 hours of equipment operator's time. So what you can see, first of all, in a SMART objective, there's a verb because it's action-oriented, and the A, actionable. Second, it is specific. You can see in this example that there is no data as to what needs to be done. Measurable, we have measures in terms of 90%, 3 months, 100 hours. So, it's not just a general, we will reduce the number of equipment breakdowns. It's by 90%, so we have a measure. It's relevant because that, presumably is in the context of a project that has to do maybe with reducing cost. And it's timely. In other words, we are going to accomplish this within 3 months, not at some point in the future. And it may be stretched because it might be difficult to get to 90% and 100 hours of equipment operator's time. So these are, the elements of a SMART objective: a verb, a target date, a desired result, and some kind of quantified budget or resource use. So this is a good discipline to have. We have a tendency to define objective in vague terms. Let's improve things over the next little while. That's not good. Define what improvement means and what little while means. Establish clear numbers. Quantify as much as you can. So what I would like you to do in your work and is to kind of build that discipline in establishing, as you define objectives for your projects, try to couch them in that way as SMART objectives. And sometimes you will find that it's not that easy to put some specific targets, some specific numbers, some specific deadlines on those objectives. Now, what I want to go over is something that, again, some of you have probably seen in some other courses or experiences or readings you've had, and that's team development. Teams don't become effective overnight. Very often, teams are put together in an ad hoc fashion. There's a project, and then we put together a team. It is not unusual for people on a team never to have worked together. Sometimes they don't even know each other. And therefore, a team doesn't become effective without, it has to develop its capabilities to become effective. So what are the phases? Well, this is the classic model, which, as I said before, some of you have probably seen before. It goes through 5 phases. One is a forming stage, then a so-called storming stage, then a norming stage, a performing stage, and finally a mourning stage. So let's go over each one of those stages to see what goes on and what particular behaviors are desirable within each of those stages. So let's start with and then for each of the stages, we want to look at essentially 3 important aspects. What is the leadership style that the team leader needs to embrace at that stage? Second, what is the type of behavior towards the task at hand? And finally, what are the interpersonal behaviors between team members? So start with the forming stage. In the forming stage, we've just started, decided on what the project is, and we've put the team together. We've taken people from here and there. In your cases, it's often a combination of staff members and volunteers, and it's not unusual for especially the volunteers to be new to this type of work. So the objective of the forming stage is to create a common understanding among team members. So the task behavior is to really get to focus on what it is we're trying to accomplish as a team. Focus on the project goals. And what's happening in terms of behavior is that, people are sort of testing, finding out who else is in there, try to kind of understand the dependence. We don't know each other, so we are sort of hesitant to open up towards each other. We're trying to kind of learn about each other. So the leadership style is directive here. As a team leader, you want to get the group going, you want to provide a structure, you want to begin to organize the work so that you can get this focus on a common goal to at least be on paper. But not that here we're not yet talking about trust and energy and so forth. The second stage is in my opinion, the most crucial stage in team development. It's called the storming stage, and that's when difficulties arise. And the objective of that stage is to discuss them, to let them come out, surface, and resolve them. So the task behavior is often driven by emotional response to project demands, whether it's in terms of availability, in terms of competence, in terms of just defining what needs to be done. People try maybe to sort of protect their own turf, their own competencies, challenging whether the definition of the project is really the way it should be. In other words, a lot of conflict in the task behavior, and the conflict being often expressed in emotional terms. The interpersonal behavior is essentially a conflict situation within the group. Conflict not necessarily defined in negative terms, but conflict in terms of essentially not being on the same page, not essentially having the same view, the same understanding, the same perspective on what needs to be done. And that's normal because this is a group of, again, a group of people that came from different places and might not have the same understanding of what needs to be done. So what's the leadership here? We call it a supporting leadership style. As a leader, you want to facilitate the discussion around the conflicts. You don't want to kill that discussion because the separate views need to be expressed, recognized, and respected. You want to set high standards in terms of both behavior and reaching the level of agreement, but realistic. Don't try to get to consensus, get to eliminating conflict right away. Wherever different views and conflicting views are expressed, you want to add, if you can, and seek from others clarification of what it is that people are talking about. So again, it's about making sure that all views are clearly expressed and respected. And of course, as a leader, you want to give constructive feedback. Your objective here, and again, that's important, is not to terminate or kill that conflicting phase too soon. Because if you do that, then important reservations that people may have may not be expressed, and that would lead then to maybe a much lower level of commitment of people. On the other hand, you don't want this stage to go too long because then the team may never come together. So the challenge here is to recognize the different views, the differing views, recognize them, explore them, and then try to reach a certain level of agreement, which is the next stage, the norming stage, where we look for common ground, build not so much consensus as alignment, and I will precise in a minute what to me is the difference between consensus and alignment. In here, because people have heard each other and respect each other's view, if the storming stage has gone well, then they are more open to each other. And what was a conflict in the storming stage become much more an open exchange of information in a norming stage. The behavior is essentially looking towards agreement. Again, I've used the standard terminology here is to use consensus, which is not a term I totally agree with. And again, I'll be more specific in a second. As a leader there, the role is more of a coaching, supporting the independent definition and completion of tasks, recognizing good work, maintaining open communication, and so forth. In other words, the negative side of conflict is turned into a positive integration into a common purpose. Now, the distinction between consensus and alignment. consensus implies complete agreement on a common view. And that's, to me, something that is not often achieved, so that when we try to push for consensus, what we find is the people who at some point sort of give up trying to get their views integrated into the common perspective, and then give essentially a lip service to a common position by sort of saying, okay, I'll go along. I like the concept of alignment better. For me, alignment is recognizing that we may not completely agree on the common perspective or the common ground, but we are prepared to support it. So in other words, for me, a team is aligned where they find a common ground, which is maybe for some of them their first choice, but for others it's not their first choice, but it's a choice that they are prepared to defend. In other words, not something that has fundamental conflicts with their own values and perspectives. And I think, so to me, the objective here is to seek alignment around a common ground, a common perspective on a project. The next stage is performing. There, everybody's doing their work, and the objective is to integrate everything into a common team output. The task behavior is that people are working on developing solutions to the individual challenges they are given by the team or within the team. The interpersonal behavior is that everybody is sort of has sort of slid into their own individual roles as problem solver, as information seekers or developers, whatever those roles are, and everybody sort of respecting each other's role within the team. As a leader here, you essentially are delegating. You are letting people do their work. In fact, you are often even delegating leadership in the sense of sort of letting the team or team members individually or collectively take on some more active leadership role, on some part of the project. And really, at least for more complex projects, the team leader, project leader here spends a lot more time outside the project dealing with the stakeholders around the project rather than within the project. In some sense, the team self-managed at that point, and the project leader spend more of his and her time dealing with the outside environment of the project. Internally, meetings become much more status report type. There is not a whole, we know what everybody's doing, and it's a question of getting report as to what's going on and if there are in particular issues. Finally, the last stage is the so-called morning phase. Again, it's called morning to keep the terminology of all the stages. Sometimes we are happy to end the project, sometimes we're not. I mean, a great project, we're always happy for it to end because we've been successful. But if it's been a great project, sometimes we're not so happy because it was such a great experience. We wish that it would continue. So, however, it's always extremely important to actively manage the end of the project. At the end of a project, people are called to do other things, and I'm sure you've all experienced, the end of a project is often not properly managed, so that loose ends hang around, there is no real wrap up, etc. So that's what the morning phase is, to make it so that we do come to a closure, to an end. The behavior is, number one, complete all remaining tasks, including, and that's very important, documenting what has been done, so that anybody who comes afterwards can learn from it, can check and make sure everything was done. The behavior is, people are going to be drifting away from their team roles because they go back to doing other things. And as a team leader, you want to kind of maintain some of that focus. So it's often a much more directive role, maybe going back to the very beginning of the project team, to make sure that the team remains focused on what remains to be done, what are remaining deliverables. Often, and especially in larger organizations, it's helping team members find out what their next assignment or the next work will be. So it's in that sense, it's supporting maybe even a coaching role, and essentially, managing a kind of a learning stage. What did we collectively and individually learn from the experience that we can then transfer to others or to our own personal development. So, so this is a pretty classic model. Again, for me, the important part is the storming stage. If you do not let the team have that dynamic element there, where individuals are really expressing their views, you might not get the full creative capabilities of the team for your project. So, in terms of performance, here's essentially what tends to happen. As the team starts the initial phase, there isn't a whole lot of performance in the sense of producing results. And that's because the team is going through the phase of making itself into a team. And as the team becomes a team, as the group of, or as a working group at the beginning becomes a team, it becomes more effective going through the stages of development. And what we have here on this chart, on this curve, is the desirable curve for a teamwork. So don't be concerned or overly concerned if no real production happens at the beginning, because it's a phase of people finding each other out. Now, if that lasts too long, then it becomes a problem, because what would happen is that the team is not coalescing, is not norming. But an initial sort of low level of production, but high level of energy is actually common and desirable.